It began with a dinner table conversation, the kind that floats between sips of wine and half-hearted glances at phones. Sierra scrolled with her thumb flicking the screen, her face aglow with a smile that didn't reach me. "Aubrey's wedding is next month," she said lightly, as though we'd been talking about grocery lists. Her family got her a first-class ticket. She's so excited. The way she said her family made it sound like an exclusive club, one I hadn't earned a membership to. I took a sip of water to steady the simmer beneath my skin. "What flight am I on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. I didn't expect much, maybe a coach seat with a last-minute boarding pass, but even that would have meant I mattered. Sierra didn't even lift her eyes. "You should call a cab or something," she said, as if it were a foregone conclusion that I wouldn't be traveling with them. Her tone carried a finality that felt like a door slamming shut. Before I could process the sting of her dismissal, her mother Margot chimed in from across the table, never one to waste an opportunity to pile on. "Only successful people fly in," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, eyes sharp as glass. The laughter that followed was a private joke meant to leave me on the outside. The room felt colder then, though the thermostat hadn't changed. I looked at Sierra, at the woman I'd spent years loving, hoping, investing. Her fingers danced over the screen, oblivious to the thousand small ways her words cut me down. My fork hovered over my plate, spearing a piece of chicken that suddenly tasted like ashes. I remembered the first time I met her family, how I'd shaken hands too firmly, worn a suit that wasn't expensive enough, smiled too wide. They'd judged me before I'd even sat down. And now, here we were, years later, and nothing had changed. I was still the plus one they couldn't quite forgive for being me. I set the fork down carefully, as though any sudden movement might shatter what was left of my dignity. I didn't trust my voice to hold steady if I spoke. The silence stretched between us, thicker than the space in the room. Sierra never looked up. Her mother took another sip of her Chardonnay, eyes flicking to mine with that well-practiced disinterest that had always felt like a challenge. "You're quiet tonight," she said, as though she were offering me a lifeline. But I knew better. It was bait, not kindness. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Just thinking," I said. That was true enough. Thinking about the years I'd spent working late nights, building something from nothing, putting Sierra's dreams ahead of my own. Thinking about the time I'd offered to cover her sister's college tuition when their father's business hit a rough patch. Thinking about the way I'd given without counting. And how, in this moment, it felt like none of it mattered. Margot tilted her head, eyes glinting. "Thinking about what?" I wanted to say, "Thinking about the day I'll finally stop letting you make me feel small." But I didn't. I said, "Just work stuff." She sniffed, unimpressed. "You and your little computer projects." She might as well have patted me on the head. "Sierra, did you see that new restaurant that opened downtown? I think we should go next week." Sierra perked up, eyes lighting at the shift in topic. "Oh, yes. I read the reviews. Everyone says it's amazing." And just like that, I was invisible, a ghost at my own dinner table. I sat there, hands folded, feeling the weight of every compromise I'd made, every time I'd bitten back the urge to stand up and shout that I was more than what they saw. But tonight, something shifted. Sierra's mother's words, "Only successful people fly in," landed like a gavel, rendering a verdict I'd been too polite to fight. I could see myself in the reflection of the glass cabinet behind her. Eyes dull, spine too straight, face too controlled. I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. I excused myself early, my appetite long gone, the conversation drifting back to flights and dresses and guest lists. I stood in the hallway, listening to their laughter echo down the hall like a soundtrack to my own erasure. My hand trembled as I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling through flight options, charter companies, anything that would get me there on my own terms. I wasn't going to be their afterthought anymore. If I had to fly in on my own dime, so be it. If I had to prove to them that I belonged, no, that I'd always belonged, then I would. Because this ticket might not have been mine in their eyes, but I'd be damned if I let them decide where I landed. They always thought I was the underachiever, a quiet software engineer from Tacoma who never wore the right suits or joined their champagne brunches. Sierra's father, Grant, once called my job cute, as if the work I'd built from the ground up was a hobby. I remember the way his words dripped with condescension, like he was patting a child on the head for coloring inside the lines. I can still hear his voice when I close my eyes, a smooth baritone that carried the weight of old money and generations of knowing they were better than the rest of us. That night at the dinner table, His smirk had settled across the room like a fog. He didn't have to say it outright. His silence was its own brand of condemnation. And Sierra's mother, Margot, with her perpetually raised eyebrow and curated disdain, always finding some new way to remind me that I wasn't one of them. They saw me as the man who married up, the guy who'd lucked his way into their perfect world. I was the tag-along, the afterthought, the charity case they tolerated for Sierra's sake. It never mattered that I'd built my own business from the ground up, with nothing but a laptop and a makeshift desk in the spare bedroom of our first apartment. It never mattered that the hours I'd poured into lines of code and sleepless nights were what paid for half the vacations they'd bragged about to their country club friends. None of it mattered because in their eyes, I was never enough. I was a seat filler at best. I'd always smiled that night, though. I'd nodded in the right places. I'd let them think they were right, let them think their words didn't cut deeper than any blade. Because what was the point of fighting back? In their world, it wasn't about who you were, but about who you could afford to be seen with. And Sierra, she was the ticket that got me through the door. But that sentence, only successful people fly in, it landed like a slap, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The problem with being underestimated is that eventually, you start to believe it. You start to think that maybe they're right, that maybe you're not enough, that maybe you're just playing dress up in a suit that doesn't quite fit. But I'd spent too many years working, building, sacrificing to let that voice win. I wasn't the man they thought I was more. I'd always been more. And if they couldn't see that, then maybe it was time to show them. That night after dinner, I sat at my desk in the dim light of the study, the glow of my laptop screen reflecting back a face that looked older than it should have. I ran my fingers through my hair, feeling the weight of every compromise I'd made to fit into a world that didn't want me. I'd let Sierra's family define my worth for too long. I'd let their whispers and their backhanded compliments chip away at the foundation I'd built for myself. I opened a blank document and started typing, a list of all the times I'd stayed silent, all the times I'd swallowed my pride to keep the peace. Each line felt like a small betrayal of who I was, a record of every time I'd let their expectations cage me. I stared at the words, my chest tight with anger and a determination I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to let them write my story anymore. I thought back to Sierra, the way she'd smiled at her mother's comment like it was a joke we were all in on, the way she'd looked through me instead of at me, the way she'd stopped seeing the man who had stood beside her when no one else would. She'd become their mirror, reflecting every shallow, petty judgment they threw at me. I'd married her for love, but somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being my partner and started being my judge. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking beneath me. I could still hear Grant's voice in my head, that smirk that never quite reached his eyes. Cute. That's what he'd called my job. I clenched my fists until my knuckles whitened. That job had paid for Sierra's college. That job had paid for the down payment on the house her mother insisted we buy in the right neighborhood. That job had kept the lights on and the fridge full. But to them, it would never be enough. To them, I would never be enough. But something inside me refused to accept that. I wasn't the man they thought I was. I wasn't the afterthought, the plus one, the seat filler. I was the man who'd built something from nothing. I was the man who'd stayed when others would have walked away. I was the man who was going to walk into that wedding, maybe not in their first-class seat, but on my own terms. I rose from the chair and crossed to the window, staring out at the darkness beyond. My reflection stared back at me, tired, but unbroken. I wasn't the man they thought I was. And it was time they saw that too. I stared at the wedding group chat on my phone. Dozens of messages, color schemes, rehearsal dinners, seating charts, and my name wasn't there. Not even as a footnote. Aubrey's pastel pinks and floral arch photos scrolled past like they belonged to another world, one I'd been locked out of. It was more than just an oversight. It was a declaration that I didn't belong. I wasn't the husband in their eyes. I was the baggage, the silent, forgettable plus one, the one who didn't matter enough to get a mention. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I set it down on the coffee table. The Seattle skyline flickered through the window, distant and impersonal, neon lights blurred by the misty night air. The city hummed with the buzz of other lives, people who were wanted, people who were included. I'd spent too many years working late nights, building my own software business from scratch, dreaming that one day I'd be more than just an afterthought. But at that moment, I felt like a footnote in my own life story. I ran my hands through my hair, feeling the tension in my scalp. The injustice of it all simmered in my chest, sparking a slow, determined anger. I wasn't going to let them erase me. If they wouldn't include me, then I'd carve my own place at that wedding. I opened my laptop, fingers flying across the keys as I calculated charter costs, hotels, logistics. Could I afford it? Not comfortably. But comfort wasn't the point. I needed to show them that I could stand on my own, uninvited, unbothered, undeniable. The screen glowed with options: Learjets, turboprops, small business charters. Each price tag a reminder that freedom comes with a cost. My chest tightened, but I ignored it. I wasn't buying luxury. I was buying dignity. I wasn't going to let Sierra's family define my worth by whether they bothered to add me to a group chat. I was going to define it myself. From the other room, Sierra's laughter rose, soft, easy, like we hadn't just had an entire marriage of compromises. Like she'd never watched her family treat me like a guest in my own home. I wondered if she even realized how it felt, being left out of the conversation like I was something to be managed. My phone vibrated with a message from Aubrey. "Hey, Jason. Let me know if you need an invite." Smiley face. The smiley face felt like a slap. I typed back, "No, I've got it handled." My thumb hit send with a finality that felt like an exhale. The silence afterward was deafening. I stared at my reflection in the black screen of my laptop, a man who'd allowed himself to be background noise for too long. My reflection was tired, but his jaw was set. His eyes were determined. That was the man I needed to be in Aspen. Not the +1. Not the tag-along. The man who walked in with his head high, wearing his own ticket like armor. Booking the flight felt like crossing a line. The confirmation email pinged into my inbox, cold and impersonal. The Gulfstream G150 would take off at noon on the wedding day, landing me at Aspen Pitkin just before the ceremony. Just in time to make an entrance they couldn't ignore. The cost made my stomach clench, but the price was worth it. For once, I wasn't the afterthought. I was the headline. I stood up, stretching muscles that felt too tight from months of playing along. My eyes fell on a wedding photo of Sierra and me, laughing on the dock at Puget Sound, hair windblown, eyes bright with promises we hadn't kept. I traced the frame with my thumb. Love had once been enough. But love needed respect to survive. And I'd realized too late that respect wasn't something you could beg for, it was something you had to demand. I sent a single message to Sierra, booked my own flight. "I'll see you there." No smiley faces. No explanations. Just fact. The truth was, I wasn't angry at her anymore. I was angry at myself for letting her family shrink me. For letting their opinions matter more than my own. That was over now. The evening air felt different as I opened the window. Cool, bracing, filled with the smell of rain on concrete. I let it wash over me, a baptism of sorts. A promise to myself that I would never again be just another +1. I was going to show them that I'd never been the seat filler. I was the one who made the table. As I shut off the lights, my mind played out every step I'd take at that wedding. The hush of the guests when I walked in, the look on Sierra's face, the way Grant's smirk would fade. I would stand in that moment, not because they'd given me a place, but because I'd claimed it for myself. And for the first time in years, I felt something like peace. I reached out to Micah that night, his name still stored in my phone like a lifeline from another life. We'd been friends since college, though our paths had diverged wildly, his into private jet logistics and mine into software engineering. But the foundation of trust hadn't eroded. I didn't need his pity, I needed his expertise. I texted him, "Need a flight to Aspen. Last minute. Got anything that lands me there in style?" His reply came quickly, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "You want in? Or do you want to be seen?" I smiled, reading the question like a challenge. "Both," I typed back. Micah didn't ask why, didn't laugh at the absurdity of it. He just got to work. That's why I'd always liked him. He understood that sometimes, making an entrance was the difference between being overlooked and being undeniable. The details came together with a precision that only Micah could pull off. A Gulfstream G150, a sleek silver bullet that looked like it belonged to someone important. A canceled VIP booking had opened a window, just enough time for me to slip in before the wedding started. It would cut it close, maybe even risk missing the start of the ceremony, but that was the point. I wasn't trying to blend in anymore. I was trying to be impossible to ignore. The price tag made me wince, a figure that would have made Sierra's mother's head spin. But I paid it without hesitation. It wasn't just a flight, it was a statement. A reminder to them, and to myself, that I didn't need their invitations to take my place. I booked it. No second thoughts. The confirmation email felt like a battle flag planted in enemy territory. When I told Micah I was all in, he didn't sugarcoat it. "This is going to get noticed," he said. "You sure you're ready for that?" I thought about Margot's smirk, Grant's patronizing grin, Sierra's dismissive tone. I thought about every time they'd made me feel like less. And then I thought about every hour I'd spent in that spare bedroom, every client I'd landed, every late-night code review that paid for their fancy wine and designer shoes. Yeah, I said. Let them see. The night before the flight, I packed deliberately. No cheap cologne or second-hand suits this time. Slate gray, tailored, sharp enough to slice through their expectations. Every detail mattered now, even the socks. Black with a discreet silver stripe. Understated, but unmissable. I wanted to look like the man they'd underestimated, the man who'd been building an empire while they were busy sipping mimosas and gossiping about other people's business. As I zipped my bag, I thought about Sierra, about the life we'd built, or tried to build, together. The laughter that had turned to sighs, the love that had soured into something transactional. I wondered if she'd even recognize the man stepping off the jet. Maybe she'd see what she'd lost. Maybe she'd finally understand that the man she'd married wasn't the afterthought her family believed he was. Sleep was a stranger that night. My mind buzzed with 1,000 possibilities, each one tinged with a fierce determination. I wasn't going to be the silent passenger anymore. I was going to be the headline, the story they'd whisper about long after the wedding ended. I wanted them to see me, really see me, and realize that I'd always been more than they'd given me credit for. The morning arrived with the pale glow of dawn cutting through the blinds. I dressed like a man going to war, cufflinks fastened, tie knotted, shoes polished to a mirror's shine. Every step felt like a declaration. I am not who you think I am. I checked my watch, the seconds ticking away like a countdown to something inevitable. At the airstrip, Micah met me with a grin that told me he understood exactly what this meant. "You ready to make an entrance?" he asked, his eyes dancing with mischief. I nodded, my stomach tight with anticipation. "Let's do this," I said, and followed him onto the tarmac. The Gulf Stream gleamed under the morning sun, an invitation to a new chapter of my life. Inside, the cabin smelled of leather and success. I sank into the plush seat, feeling the hum of engines beneath me like a promise. This wasn't just a plane. It was my way of taking back the narrative, of proving that I belonged on my own terms. As the engines roared to life, I thought about the look on Sierra's face when she saw me step out. I wondered if she'd feel pride, or regret, or maybe just confusion at how I'd found a way to rise without her family's help. As the plane lifted off, the city below shrank to a tapestry of lights and streets. I felt a weight lift from my chest, a freedom I hadn't tasted in years. I was on my way, not as their afterthought, but as my own man. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't care what they thought of me. I was flying in on my own dime, in my own style, and I couldn't wait to see the look on their faces when I landed. Sierra had left for Aspen 3 days earlier, the way she always left, without much ceremony, just a quick kiss on the cheek and a reminder about the pet sitter. "Don't forget to tip them if they drop anything off," she'd said, like it was an afterthought, like it was a detail she'd rather not be bothered with. She'd walked out the door in a swirl of perfume and efficiency, leaving behind the faint echo of a life that had stopped including me long ago. I watched her car disappear down the driveway, a silent witness to the last piece of normalcy slipping away. That morning, I dressed carefully. Slate suit, pressed and ready. Crisp white shirt, cuffs starched to perfection. Black shoes polished to a mirror shine. Nothing too flashy, nothing too loud, just intentional, every piece chosen like an armor of dignity. I'd spent too many years letting their expectations dictate how I showed up. Today, I was arriving on my own terms. At 10:20 a.m., I boarded the jet. Alone. The engines hummed with the quiet confidence of power, the leather seats gleaming with a promise of arrival. I buckled myself in, fingers drumming against the armrest, the hum of the engines matching the steady rhythm of my heart. The flight crew moved efficiently, a well-oiled machine that didn't ask questions or share glances. They were professionals. They didn't care who I was, only that I was here. I liked that. Outside, the runway stretched out like an invitation to leave it all behind. The city skyline receded, and with it the weight of every forced smile, every patronizing glance. I thought of Sierra, of the way her mother's words had felt like a gavel striking the table. Only successful people fly in. That line had branded itself onto my soul, but now it felt different, like a challenge I'd accepted. The engines roared to life, the acceleration pressing me back into my seat, a force that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I watched the ground fall away, the houses shrinking to matchboxes, the roads to threads of possibility. The sky opened up, vast and blue, a canvas unmarked by their expectations. Up here, I wasn't Sierra's plus one. I wasn't the man her father called cute, or the afterthought at every dinner table. I was the man who made his own way, who bought his own ticket, who refused to be defined by their laughter. The quiet before takeoff had always been my favorite part of flying. That moment when you sit there, engine spooling, the anticipation coiling in your gut. It felt like potential, like all the ways things could go right or wrong hadn't yet been decided. I breathed it in, the scent of leather and jet fuel and new beginnings. I wasn't sure what would happen when I landed. Would Sierra be waiting? Would she even care that I'd come on my own terms? I didn't know. And for once, that didn't matter. The flight was smooth, the sky a steady blue with only the occasional cloud breaking the monotony. I let my mind wander. I thought about the first time Sierra had called me from her parents' house, crying because her father had belittled her for choosing me over one of his golf buddies' sons. I'd promised her then that I'd always fight for her, always be her safe place. I wondered if she remembered that now. I wondered if she even saw the man I'd become. I stared out the window, the clouds drifting by like silent witnesses. I imagined the look on Margot's face when she saw me walk in. The way Grant's smile would falter, the way Sierra's eyes might widen with surprise or disappointment. I wasn't coming to cause a scene. I wasn't coming to fight. I was coming because I'd earned the right to stand in that room, to take up space, to show them that I wasn't the man they'd always assumed I was. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. We're on schedule for Aspenpickin, arriving around 1:45 p.m. Should be a smooth descent. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Smooth descent. That's what I'd been chasing for years, a way to land without making waves. But sometimes waves needed to be made. Sometimes you had to let the quiet become the roar. I closed my eyes, feeling the hum of the engines beneath me, a steady rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. I thought about every time I'd let them silence me, every time I'd smiled and nodded and swallowed the words I wanted to say. Not anymore. When I landed, I wouldn't be the background character. I wouldn't be the plus one. I'd be the man who refused to be overlooked. As the plane descended, the ground came into focus, green valleys, snow-capped peaks, the winding roads that led to the place where it would all come to a head. I adjusted my tie, checked my reflection in the polished window, and squared my shoulders. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. When the wheels touched down, a calm settled over me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I stood, gathering my things, and stepped off the plane into the crisp mountain air. No one expected me to arrive like this. And that was exactly the point. We landed 3 hours after the scheduled start time, and I didn't rush. I didn't want to rush. The entire point of this flight, this moment, was to arrive on my own terms. To step into their carefully choreographed wedding like a ripple in the still water of their plans. A black car waited on the tarmac. Sleek, polished, the kind of car that didn't ask questions. I settled into the back seat, feeling the weight of the jet lag and the anticipation settling like a stone in my chest. I gave the driver the address, Summit Chapel. My voice didn't waver. My heart did. I kept my gaze steady, the world blurring by in a rush of greens and golds. The ceremony had already started. I could see it in the way the staff glanced at me, polite but tight-lipped, eyes darting between me and their watches. I paid them no mind. I smoothed my suit jacket, adjusted my cufflinks. I hadn't come here to blend in. I had come here to make sure they saw me. Every last one of them. When we pulled up to the chapel, the sun was beginning its slow descent, casting a honeyed glow across the parking lot. White floral arches stood like sentinels, guarding a world I had always been half invited to. Music drifted through the open doors, a soft piano, a choir of polite laughter. The driver opened my door. I stepped out, letting the air fill my lungs like a dare. 2 ushers at the top of the steps turned to block my way, arms crossed in a gesture that said more than words. Sir, one began, but I was already past him. I didn't stop. I didn't slow. I let my steps carry me up the steps, the steady rhythm of my heartbeat matching the silent pulse of defiance in my chest. My hand reached for the handle, a brief hesitation catching me like a breath held too long. Then I pushed the door open. It felt like a scene from a movie. Heads turned, mouths froze, the pianist hit a wrong note. For a moment, it was like the whole room had sucked in a single breath, waiting for me to either apologize or shrink. But I didn't. I let their stares wash over me like rain. I found Sierra first, her face pale, eyes wide with the shock of someone who's just seen a ghost. Margot's champagne flute trembled in her grasp. Grant's smile faltered, that practiced, patronizing grin slipping just a fraction. I didn't look at them. Not really. I kept my eyes forward, my spine straight, my chin lifted. Every step down that aisle felt like reclaiming something they'd stolen from me, my dignity, my sense of self, my place at the table. The groom, Isaac, was the first to break the silence. His face shifted from confusion to relief, his eyes lighting up like I'd just handed him a lifeline. "Hey, man," he whispered, his voice low but grateful. "You actually came." I smiled at him, small and genuine. "You'll need a ride back too," I said, my voice clear, steady, carrying across the hushed crowd. A few people laughed, real, unguarded laughter that cracked the tension like thunder. Isaac doubled over, shaking his head. "You're a legend," he murmured. Aubrey, the bride, gave me a half-smile, stunned, but not angry, just surprised. Sierra didn't speak. Her jaw clenched tight enough to crack a diamond. Margot blinked fast, like if she stared long enough, I'd vanish. I didn't. I stood there, letting the officiant stumble over his notes, letting the room recalibrate around me. I took a seat in the front pew, right next to my wife, who still hadn't said a word. The scent of her perfume hit me, a familiar, bittersweet reminder of the years we'd spent pretending this family's approval mattered. I folded my hands and looked straight ahead. I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd flown in on my own terms, and that was enough. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd finally arrived. The room fell silent the second my foot crossed the threshold. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, a vacuum that swallowed laughter, small talk, even the notes of the pianist's cautious melody. All eyes turned to me, the man they'd never expected to see, the man who had always been the afterthought, the one they thought they could conveniently forget. But I wasn't forgetting them. Not today. I felt their stares like the sun's heat, every glance another burn on my skin. Sierra's face was a perfect study in pale shock. Her lips parted, but no words formed. Margot's flute, half-raised, trembled in her grasp. Grant's smirk was gone, replaced with a thin line of confusion and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of respect. It didn't matter anymore. Their expectations, their assumptions, they'd carried them like weapons for years, slicing away at who I was until I'd almost believed them. But that was over. Today, I stood in this room as a man who'd earned his place. I didn't rush. Every step down that aisle felt deliberate, like I was reclaiming every inch of ground they'd tried to deny me. I let my eyes scan the faces, some strangers, some familiar, all of them waiting to see what I would do. My suit felt like armor, every thread woven with purpose, every button a declaration that I was no longer the plus one, the afterthought, the silent observer. The music stumbled, the pianist's fingers hitting a wrong note that rang out in the hush. I didn't flinch. I kept walking, my eyes fixed on Isaac, the groom, who stood at the front like a lighthouse in a storm. His face shifted from confusion to relief, his shoulders dropping in a silent exhale. I'd always liked Isaac. He'd never treated me like an accessory, never joined in the family's quiet campaign to keep me small. And now, in his eyes, I saw gratitude, like he knew that my presence meant something. I reached him and clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You'll need a ride back too," I said, my voice low but carrying. A ripple of laughter cracked the tension, some genuine, some forced. Isaac let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it since the ceremony started. "Man, I can't believe you actually came," he whispered, his eyes glistening. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. And I meant it. Because this wasn't just about them, it was about me, about proving to myself that I could stand here, unafraid, unapologetic. Sierra still hadn't spoken. Her jaw clenched, her eyes darting between me and the rest of the room. I could see the calculation in her gaze, the desperate attempt to figure out how this had happened, how I'd slipped through the cracks of her carefully constructed plan. Margot blinked rapidly, her lips a thin line of disapproval, but even she couldn't find the words to cut me down. Grant's expression was inscrutable, but his eyes tracked me like a man who'd just seen a ghost. Maybe he had. I turned to the officiant, who was fumbling with his notes, his composure as rattled as the rest of the room. "Sorry for the interruption," I said, my tone even, my eyes steady. "Please go on." He stammered a thank you, his voice wavering. But he recovered quickly, slipping back into the script with the practiced ease of a man who'd seen enough awkward moments to last a lifetime. I took my seat in the front pew, right next to Sierra, and folded my hands in my lap. The scent of her perfume wrapped around me, familiar and distant all at once. She didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, her spine rigid, her breathing shallow. I didn't care. This wasn't about her anymore. The ceremony continued, the words washing over me like a language I'd forgotten. I let them flow, let the rituals unfold. But my mind stayed sharp, focused on the reason I was here. I wasn't here to make a scene or steal the spotlight. I was here to stand tall, to remind them, and myself, that I wasn't the man they'd always assumed. I was the man who could rise, the man who could walk into their world on his own terms and take his seat without apology. As the vows were exchanged, I caught Isaac's eye, and he gave me the smallest nod. A thank you. A silent promise that he understood. And that was enough. Because I wasn't just here for me. I was here for every time they tried to make me feel small, for every moment they'd let their laughter drown me out. Today, I was the man who'd come back, not to beg for a place, but to claim it. The room fell silent again as they kissed, applause breaking out like rain on a tin roof. I clapped too, slow and steady, my hands striking the air like punctuation marks. I wasn't hiding in the background. I was right there, in the front row, where I belonged. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like I was finally home. Laughter cracked like thunder, rolling through the cavernous space of the chapel and bouncing off the marble walls with a resonance that seemed to magnify every chuckle, every titter, every sigh. I stood there, the echo of my own words. He'll need a ride back too, still hanging in the air like a challenge. Isaac doubled over, his laughter ragged but genuine, and in that moment I saw the tension drain from his shoulders, saw the lines of worry fade from his brow. For a second, I saw the boy I'd met years ago, the one who'd laughed at my jokes, the one who'd never looked at me like I was anything less than an equal. I'd come here for myself, but standing next to him, I realized I'd come here for him too. Aubrey turned her head slowly, her veil catching the soft glow of the candles that lined the altar. Her half-smile was equal parts stunned and relieved. Maybe she hadn't wanted the show, maybe she had, but now she had it, and so did everyone else. Sierra, my wife, if that's what she still was, sat frozen in her seat, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might crack a molar. Her eyes darted from me to the crowd and back again, like a cornered animal searching for an exit. But there was no exit this time. Not for her. Not for me. Not for any of them. Margot, ever the picture of composure, sat stiff and regal, but the delicate tremor in her hand gave her away. The champagne flute she'd been nursing all evening threatened to slip from her fingers. She took a measured sip, her lips pressing into a thin line of disapproval as though the taste of the bubbly had soured with my presence. She didn't look at me. That would have required acknowledging that I'd managed to crash their perfect little tableau. The officiant, poor, bumbling officiant, fumbled with his notes, his eyes darting between me, the groom, and the bride as though searching for guidance. His face was pale, his hands trembling just enough that the gold wedding band he wore seemed to glint with nervous energy. He cleared his throat, the sound small and inadequate in the charged atmosphere. Shall we continue? He stammered, his voice rising like a question to no one in particular. Please, I said, my voice calm, even. Let's not keep the bride waiting. My tone carried no malice, but it carried weight. A declaration that I wasn't going anywhere. I saw Sierra flinch, and something in me hardened. I wasn't here to comfort her. I wasn't here to make this easy for anyone but myself. The ceremony resumed, the words of love and commitment feeling like a script I'd read too many times. My own wedding to Sierra came back to me in flashes, the soft music, the scent of roses, the way she'd smiled at me like I was her whole world. Back then, I believed it. Back then, I believed her. Now, her silence felt like a confession of all the ways she'd let her family erase me, all the ways she'd let herself become a mirror for their contempt. I sat through the vows, the rings, the kiss, each moment another drop in a sea of indifference. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch when Sierra's mother glanced back at me, her eyes narrowing with that cold calculation I'd come to know so well. She thought she could freeze me out with a look, but I'd spent too many nights in that family's shadow to be chilled now. When the ceremony ended, the guests rose like a tide, a wave of pastel dresses and tailored suits. They drifted toward the aisles, eager for the reception, eager for the photos and the speeches and the endless small talk that made them feel important. I stayed in my seat, my hands folded, my eyes fixed on the front of the chapel. I felt Sierra's presence beside me like a weight, her perfume cloying and heavy. She didn't speak. Neither did I. We'd said enough without words. Isaac made his way down the aisle, his face flushed with relief and joy. He stopped when he reached me, his hand extended, his smile genuine. I'm glad you came, he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear it. It means a lot. Wouldn't miss it, I replied. And for the first time that day, I meant it. Because even in the middle of their curated, coldly perfect world, there were people like Isaac who reminded me that decency hadn't completely died in the glow of their champagne glasses. Sierra didn't look at me when she stood, her movements mechanical, practiced. She turned to follow her family, the lines of her body taut with tension. I watched her go, wondering if she'd even remember this moment years from now, wondering if it would haunt her the way it would haunt me. I didn't follow her. I didn't chase. I let her walk away. The organ music rose, the chords triumphant and grand, but to me it sounded like a dirge, a farewell to the man I'd been, the man who'd spent too long waiting for a place that was never going to be given. I stood, the weight of that realization a strange comfort. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't asking. As I stepped into the aisle, I felt every eye on me, but I didn't shrink. I met their stares with a calm that surprised even me. Let them watch. Let them judge. Let them talk about me later, whispering my name like a cautionary tale. It didn't matter anymore. I'd arrived, and I wasn't leaving until I was ready. The reception hall was a glittering maze of white tablecloths and crystal chandeliers, every detail curated to impress. The air smelled of lilies and expensive cologne. I moved through it like a ghost, untouchable, immune to the polite laughter and the practiced smiles. Sierra's family floated from table to table, hands fluttering, voices pitched just right. I caught snippets of conversation, investment portfolios, ski vacations, gossip about who was marrying who. The same old script, delivered by the same old actors. I found a seat near the bar, ordered a glass of whiskey. Neat. The bartender, a young guy with a sleeve of tattoos and eyes too tired for his age, gave me a nod of understanding. Rough night? He asked. Long one, I replied. He poured, the amber liquid catching the light like a promise. I took a sip, the burn steadying me. I let the noise wash over me, the laughter and the music and the clinking of glasses. I thought about every time I'd tried to fit in, every time I'd worn the right suit, said the right thing, played the game. And how every time, it had felt like I was performing for a crowd that would never clap. Tonight, I wasn't performing. I was done with the applause I'd never get. The band started up, some smooth jazz number that felt as fake as the smiles around me. I watched Isaac take Aubrey's hand, leading her to the dance floor, the two of them moving with an ease that made my chest ache. He caught my eye, and I gave him a nod. His smile widened, and for a moment, the noise faded, and it was just the two of us, two men who'd found their own way to be here. Sierra passed by, her eyes sliding over me like I was furniture. She paused for half a second, as if to say something, but then she moved on. I didn't stop her. I didn't need her words. The silence said more than enough. As the night wore on, I watched the people drift in and out, laughter giving way to yawns, music shifting from upbeat to slow. I didn't move. I didn't dance. I didn't mingle. I existed. And that was enough. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd earned that space. I'd come in on my own terms, and I'd leave the same way. The last toast came and went, the band packing up, the waiters clearing the tables. I drained my glass, the last drop sharp on my tongue. I stood, feeling the weight of the night settle on my shoulders. I took one last look around, a room full of people who'd spent years trying to forget me, and I felt nothing but a quiet certainty that I'd never let them define me again. When I walked out into the cool night air, I felt lighter than I had in years. I'd come here to be seen, and I had been. Not as the man they wanted me to be, but as the man I really was. And that was all I'd ever needed. Photos happened. Cake cutting. First dance. I didn't participate. I existed. I hovered at the edges of the room, watching with the kind of quiet detachment I'd honed over years of being the man who didn't quite fit. I made no scenes, no speeches. I wasn't there to draw attention. I was there to bear witness. I watched the flashbulbs pop, watched the bride's laughter bloom, watched Sierra's family bask in the glow of a wedding they'd planned like a royal event. I stood where the lights didn't reach, hands folded, smile small and polite. That was enough. I caught Isaac's eye once during the reception, his grin full of relief and surprise. He looked like he wanted to say something, but the moment passed. I saw it in his eyes, though, a silent thank you, a nod of solidarity. We were both there in ways no one else understood. The night wore on, the music shifted from lively to slow, the chatter from excited to tired. Sierra's laughter reached my ears more than once, high and brittle like glass about to break. She moved through the crowd with a practiced grace, but I saw the cracks, the way her eyes darted around like she was waiting for someone to to make it right. But I wasn't that man anymore. I watched the family table like a battlefield. Margot held court, her voice too loud, her smile too wide. Grant's laughter was the same, sharp, rehearsed, more for the audience than any genuine joy. I remembered the first time I'd sat at their table, nervous, trying to please them, trying to be enough. Now I saw it for what it was, a stage where only their lines mattered. I was a prop to them. Not anymore. The band played a last slow dance, some classic love song that had never sounded sadder. Couples swayed under the chandeliers, lost in the moment, the world reduced to the space between their feet. I stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching Sierra move in the arms of an uncle or cousin, somebody who'd always known how to stand in the light, somebody who'd always had a seat at the table. She didn't look at me. I didn't need her to. Her silence said enough. When the song ended, I found Isaac by the bar, his tie loosened, his hair a mess. "If you meant what you said about escaping all this," I said, voice low but firm, "now's your chance." He blinked at me, surprised, like he hadn't expected me to call him on it. But then his smile broke across his face, wide and free. "You're serious," he said. "I am." He downed the last of his drink, set the glass on the counter, and turned to the room. His eyes swept over the guests, the polished silverware, the carefully arranged centerpieces. He exhaled a laugh that was half relief, half disbelief. "Hell yes," he said. "We didn't make a scene. We didn't need to. We slipped out the side door like ghosts leaving a haunted house." The night air hit us like a blessing, cool and sharp, filled with the scent of pine and possibility. Isaac ran a hand through his hair, his eyes shining. "You really think they'll even notice I'm gone?" I shrugged. "They might. But do you care?" He let out a bark of laughter, something honest and unguarded. "No," he said. "I really don't." We walked down the sidewalk together, two men who'd spent too long playing roles that didn't fit. My car waited at the curb, black and sleek and silent. Isaac looked at it like it was freedom. I unlocked the doors with a click, and he slid into the passenger seat, his breath misting in the cold air. I took the driver's seat, the leather cold against my back, and started the engine. The hum of the motor felt like defiance. I glanced at Isaac, his grin wide and full of something like hope. "Where to?" I asked. "Anywhere but here," he said. I pulled away from the curb, the night swallowing us whole. The wedding faded in the rearview mirror, the laughter and the music and the clinking of glasses reduced to a memory. We drove in silence at first, the road unspooling ahead of us like a promise. The city lights gave way to dark roads, the stars peeking through the clouds like watchful eyes. I felt a lightness in my chest, like I'd finally let go of the last thread tying me to that family, that world. Isaac turned to me, his eyes serious now. "Why'd you really come, Jason?" I kept my eyes on the road, my hands steady on the wheel. "To remind myself I never needed their seat at the table," I said. "I own the whole damn runway." He let out a low whistle, impressed. "Damn," he said. "That's one way to make an exit." I laughed, the sound genuine and deep. "I'm done with exits," I said. "I'm all about entrances now." The night stretched ahead of us, filled with unknowns, but I wasn't afraid. I'd spent too many years waiting for an invitation that never came. Now, I was done waiting. I was done asking. I was making my own place, and no one could take that from me. Isaac leaned back in his seat, a smile playing on his lips. "Thanks, man," he said. "For everything." I nodded. "No need," I said. "Just remember this moment the next time you feel like you don't belong." He chuckled, his eyes closing. "Yeah," he murmured. "Yeah, I will." We drove in silence, the night our only witness, the stars our only audience. And in that silence, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Not because I'd won some battle, not because I'd proved something to them, but because I'd proved something to myself, that I was enough, that I'd always been enough. And as the miles stretched behind us and the road unfurled before us, I knew one thing with a certainty that made my chest ache with relief. I'd never be just another +1 again. We rode back in silence, Isaac looking out the window, dazed. "Why'd you really come?" he asked. I answered, to remind myself I never needed their seat at the table. I own the whole damn runway. When we boarded the jet again, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free, not because I showed them, but because I remembered who I am. And from that day forward, they did too. The night air outside the jet hung heavy with a chill that matched the relief in my chest. The Gulfstream's engines hummed with quiet power as I settled into the plush seat, the leather cool against my back, the weight of every unspoken word lifting with the roar of the turbines. I watched the ground crew go through their motions, a dance of practiced precision that felt comforting in its familiarity. This was my space now. Not the crowded pews of a chapel, not the empty chatter of a reception hall. Here, in the cabin of a jet I'd booked on my own terms, I felt like I'd finally claimed something that no one could take from me. Isaac sat across from me, his suit wrinkled, his tie askew, but his grin still wide. "Man, I can't believe you actually came through," he said, his voice a mix of admiration and disbelief. I didn't think anyone would ever call me on that escaping talk. I laughed, the sound echoing in the cabin, honest and warm. "Neither did I admitted. But then I realized if I didn't take that chance, if I didn't show up, then I'd just be playing the same game they've always played." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "You know," he said, "you gave me a way out. But more than that, you gave me a reason to take it." I shifted in my seat, letting his words sink in. I hadn't come here to save him. I'd come to save myself. But maybe, in the process, I'd done both. The engine spooled up, the hum growing to a low roar as we began to taxi down the runway. I glanced out the window at the lights winking in the darkness, a city that had always felt like a foreign land. As we lifted off, the ground fell away, the light shrinking to pinpricks against the night sky. I closed my eyes, letting the vibration of the plane become a rhythm in my chest, a steady reminder that I was leaving more than a wedding behind. I was leaving the man I'd let them see. The man they'd underestimated, the man who'd stayed quiet at dinner tables and let their laughter define him. The memory of Sierra's face, pale and stunned, played in my mind like a reel of a movie I'd watched too many times. Her eyes had widened in that moment I'd walked into the ceremony, a silent apology I'd never asked for flickering in the way her lips parted. But I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her approval. That was the freedom I'd found on that runway, the realization that I'd been waiting for her to give me something I'd always had the power to give myself. Isaac dozed off, his head resting against the seat, his mouth slack with exhaustion. I watched him for a moment, thinking about all the ways we'd both been trapped by their expectations. He'd been the golden boy, the one everyone assumed would follow the script. I'd been the outsider, the one no one thought would ever step up. And here we were, two men in a jet, flying away from the noise, the judgments, the weight of family legacies we'd never asked to inherit. I leaned my head back and stared at the ceiling, the soft glow of the overhead lights painting everything in a muted calm. I thought about the life I wanted, a life not defined by seating charts and approval ratings. A life where I could build something without worrying if it would measure up to Margot's standard of success or Grant's definition of achievement. I'd spent too long letting their voices shape my own. Somewhere over the Rockies, the turbulence kicked in, a mild shudder that rattled the glass in the cup holders. I didn't flinch. I'd flown through worse. I'd lived through worse. And with every bump, every shiver of the fuselage, I felt something solidify inside me. I wasn't the man they thought I was. I never had been. I was the man who'd survived every one of their dismissals and come out stronger. The man who'd stopped asking for permission and started claiming his own runway. When the jet leveled out, I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the missed calls and messages from Sierra. Apologies, explanations, half-hearted attempts to patch the cracks she'd helped create. I didn't reply. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because the truth was, I didn't owe her anything. Not anymore. I'd given everything I had, my love, my loyalty, my silence, and she'd traded it for their acceptance. That was her choice. This flight, this freedom, was mine. I glanced at Isaac, still asleep, his breathing slow and even. I thought about the wedding we'd just left behind, the carefully curated facade that hid the rot beneath, the laughter that rang hollow, the toasts that sounded like eulogies. I wondered if they'd even noticed we'd gone, if they'd missed the man who'd always stood in the shadows, waiting for a place at their table. Maybe they had. Maybe they hadn't. It didn't matter. Because I wasn't that man anymore. The engines hummed, a steady drone that felt like a heartbeat. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, the realization settling like a balm. I'd reclaimed something tonight. Not just my pride. Not just my dignity. I'd reclaimed my own narrative. I'd stopped waiting for them to see me and started seeing myself. The plane began its descent, the lights of a new city twinkling in the distance, a promise of something different. I didn't know what waited for me there. I didn't care, because I knew who I was now. I was the man who owned the runway, the man who'd stopped asking for a seat and started building his own damn table. As we touched down, I felt the wheels hit the tarmac, a jolt that reverberated through my chest like a final punctuation mark. I looked at Isaac, who stirred awake, his eyes bleary but smiling. "Where to next?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep but tinged with hope. I smiled back, a small, satisfied grin. "Anywhere we want," I said. And I meant it. Because from this day forward, the world was wide open, and I wasn't waiting for anyone's permission to claim it.